Hi, I'm Tina Oldno, Curator of Modern Glass at the Corning Museum of Glass. On February 28, 2008, Karen LaMonte presented a lecture about her work as part of the museum's ongoing Meet the Artist program. We hope that you'll enjoy the following video cast of that lecture. For a lecture transcript or more information about the Corning Museum of Glass, please visit the museum's website at www.cmog.org. I am really pleased to say that Karen LaMonte is here with us tonight. I know a lot of you love her beautiful sculpture, which is the Evening Dress with Shawl in the Sculpture Gallery. And you're just going to love her even more after you hear her speak. Sorry, Karen. But it's really a pleasure to have her here tonight. Even though she says she's not so busy, she really is busy and lives in Prague most of the year with her husband, who's here also tonight, Stephen Polliner. And so I'm so glad that both of them are here. In fact, we actually had some calls tonight from the people who couldn't make it and were asking me, well, when is she coming back to the museum? So Karen, you're welcome anytime. And for those of you who want to share her lecture maybe with your friends, we will have a video cast available on our website. And we do have several of the Meet the Artist lectures as well as interviews available on our website. So you can download those to your iPods or you can listen to them on your computer. And they're really great. I think that you would enjoy that. Karen has been an independent artist since 1998. And she's told me that she's going to give some of her biographical information during her presentation, but I think I'm going to tell you a few things that she might not talk about, like her amazing museum shows. Karen has been exhibiting for 10 years in museum shows throughout the United States and Europe. However, she has had 2 solo shows in museums of great distinction, really fantastic shows that, when I saw images of them, I was just literally, my breath was taken away. They were so incredible, such intelligence and discipline. The first one was Vanitas, which took place at the Czech Museum of Fine Art in Prague. She's one of the few Americans to have had her work shown in Prague. Certainly the Czech Republic, as most of you know, is one of the great centers and the leading center of European glassmaking, so that's a really great honor. And she had that show in 2004, and of course, our exquisite evening dress in the gallery made its first public appearance in Prague. And then her show in 2005, and I'm sure she will discuss both shows, called Absence Adorned, which was really a spectacular, superb exhibition. This is a detail of a curtain, incredible from that exhibition. Just really, it was in 2005 and I'm still talking about it. In addition, she has maintained a vigorous gallery exhibition schedule, both solo shows and group shows since 1985. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the RISD School of Design in 1990, and then undertook postgraduate studies at the Academy of Art, Architecture, and Design in Prague in 1999 and also 2000. She has received many awards for her work, and I am going to mention them. Specifically the prestigious European Award named in honor of Jutta Kuhny, France in 2007, a Japan-United States Friendship Commission, which was awarded by the National Endowment for the Arts Creative Artists Exchange Fellowship Program in 2006, the Virginia A. Groot Foundation Recognition Award in 2005, the Urban Glass Award for New Talent in 2002, the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Biennial Award in 2001, a Fulbright grant in 1999 and 2000 to the Czech Republic, and the Manhattan Arts International Award of Excellence in 2000. She has also been an artist in residence at the Creative Glass Center of America in Millville, New Jersey, and at Northlands Creative Glass in Scotland. Karen's work is represented in many private and also many public collections, including the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, the M.H. de Young Memorial Art Museum in San Francisco, the Corning Museum of Glass, of course, the Chrysler Museum of Art, the Tucson Museum of Art, the Racine Art Museum, and the Museum of American Glass in Millville, New Jersey. And finally, for those of you in the crowd who are Matthew Barney fans, and I count myself among you, Karen worked on the Cremaster 5 video in 1997, creating the glass pieces that were used in the film. Please welcome Karen LaMonte. Okay.
Thank you very much for coming out. I wanted to start by thanking everybody who has lured me here to Corning and gently guided me around. Tina, Amy, Louise, Peter Drobny, and of course Doug and Katya. Thank you all. I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of my personal history and an introduction to work that I did before I started on these large-scale dresses. I was born in New York City in 1967, and I decided I wanted to be an artist when I was about 13 years old. So I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and I graduated in 1990, and my sort of professor of greatest influence, I feel, has been Bruce Chow. When I left college and I went back to New York, my early work really focused on metaphoric figures. I worked with puppets, marionettes, sort of tertiarily figurative work. These are a series called The Seven Deadly Sins. This is sloth. And I liked focusing on human attributes, you know, this lazy person with these giant heavy hands. This is a piece from the Puppets series, and I was sort of, my first goal in life was to become the best female glassblower in the world. I was obsessed with the Italian techniques and all of the Ballantini cane and how it was possible to use such a traditional format, but to make actually the web and the weft of cloth, because that's what all of the cane work looked like to me. After a while, I realized I was actually interested in the body of the puppet and not really the head or the rest of the puppet. And so I started making small blown clotheslines. And these are just sort of, I would do one clothesline per blow slot at Urban Glass. And these are just whimsical little drawing lines. And then I realized that I wanted to make life-size, you know, human scale, my scale work focusing on clothing, and that I realized very quickly, I tried a couple of smaller pieces in the United States, and I realized that scale was immediately going to be an issue. And so that's what led to the move to the Czech Republic. And so in 1999, I applied for the Fulbright and moved to Prague. I studied for 1 year, and my grant was to study at the Applied Arts Academy and to work in these foundries. That there are three major foundries that you can go into as an artist and cast glass. So I went and I met the foundry owners, and I showed them my sort of past work, and I said, and I want to cast a glass dress. And one of the foundry owners said, great, come on up. So that was sort of the beginning. At this point, I just wanted to share, I have kind of three or four areas of work: the large-scale dresses that are in 3-dimension, and some bas-relief pieces. And then I also work in print, again, monumental scale, and these pieces I call sartoriotypes. Sartorial means of or related to tailored clothing, and type literally means impression. So these pieces are dresses that I've inked up and printed in a giant printing press. And then the mirrors are sort of the most recent explorations, and working with themes of self-image, beauty, perceived beauty, just on a smaller scale. So moving to Prague was a huge transitional period for me. I left the United States, and I actually believe that living in Europe has had a deep influence on my work. The lifestyle, the pace of life, the architecture, the adornment of the architecture has kind of crept into my subconscious, and I believe has become a part of my vocabulary. Almost every building in Prague is decorated if it's not completely falling apart. Also, there was a sense of solitude in Prague that I did not have working in the United States. This is the main train station, which is just incredible to me. It's a little different than Grand Central. I love Grand Central, but this is different. So this is my favorite building in Prague. It's my studio. Underneath the wooden platform is my workspace. So I thought what I would do is start with a piece that's familiar to all of us and talk about all of the steps I went through in making it. This piece is sort of the bridge piece. It was in the exhibition Vanitas, but it was really the first in the series that I made for the Absence Adorned piece, Absence Adorned show. And what I was working with was the clothed figure, but then these drapery kind of flourishes. So first, I had to make the absence. And to do that, I started with a live model. This is a friend of mine from the Academy, Teresa. And she modeled, well, I took a plaster mold off of her figure. And I did all of this first. I was the first model for a plaster mold because I wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was asking of my friends. And it's not the most comfortable thing. It's not totally impossible, but it's not the most comfortable thing. And you can see here I'm looking into the interior cavity of that mold because that's what I'm interested in, is the hollow space or the absence that will become the core of the piece. After making the plaster mold, I make a rubber positive, and now we're going to jump back and forth between positive and negative and positive and negative, so pay attention. So this is a positive, and around this rubber positive, I will paint hot wax, and the hot wax takes the impression of the body. The wax is painted on in two halves, and then I open up the two halves, take out that rubber body, put the two halves back together, and tape them together. And you have to understand that there isn't actually a manual written on how to do this, so I pretty much have made it all up as I've gone along. So if there's anybody in the audience who has a better idea, be sure to tell me afterwards. So now I have my absence. I have a wax shell around it, and then I start working adorning it. And my vocabulary, sort of my decorative vocabulary, is clothing. In my studio, I have 400 dresses, and from all fashion periods, all styles, every fabric, anything I can find, I collect and bring back to my studio. And so I worked putting a dress around the piece, and in this piece, this was the first in the series where I started exploring the possibility of using fabric to enhance the emotional state of the piece. So, Teresa, when I did her position, the two things that were very important to me was that her feet were not touching the ground, that she was actually floating in the air, and that her arms were thrown back, and it was almost like this flight. And so when I added the drapery pieces, I sort of left them coming off like trails, like jet trails or wings coming off of her hands. So that's the blue fabric in the background. So then the next step is sort of everything is very funky and non-technical. I use hairspray to stiffen the fabric. So I think I used about 10 cans of extremely cheap hairspray to stiffen up the fabric. And then I penetrated it with wax. I painted on molten wax and blew with a hairdryer. And once the fabric was stiffened, I was able to work with plaster bandages, just like what you would use for a broken arm. And I built a temporary shell around the fabric and then started working, pouring and injecting and spatula smearing wax onto the inside of the piece, inside of the fabric. So what I had to do was completely fill up the space between my core and the dress, and then in all of the wrinkles of this thing. So then I took away the dress. So you can see here is the drapery piece. And this is the effect that I'm looking for. It's this impression of the body sort of in contact or in contrast with this exterior drapery. Here's the entire piece ready to go to the foundry, and you can see I've cut away the body where there is no dress. Therefore, the body is defined only by the clothing it wears. And this has sort of metaphoric implications that I like to play with. You know, do we define our societies? Because I believe that the society is represented by the clothing, or is the society defining us? So the next step, now I've started counting days for you, because everybody always says, how long does it take to make a piece? So far I've been working in my studio anywhere from like a month and a half to 2 months. So here we are, we make it up to the studio, and these are the mold makers. This is the mold making room. And the first thing we do, or they do, is build a reservoir, like walls, retaining walls around the wax piece. Then there's a mixture of plaster and silica that is poured around that wax positive, and it's a liquid. So it flows and it fills all of the nooks and crannies and details, every sort of thread of texture. And I'm left with a 500-pound plaster silica mold with a lump of wax in it. Then comes the fun part. This is actually the very first piece I made at the factory, and you can see Steve and I are jerry-rigging pressure pots and rubber hoses, because the factory had a different way of working with different types of positives and had not really melted so much wax out of these plaster forms. So we stayed up and did that part. But you can see today they've built this steam box because they got the message that I wasn't going away anytime soon. And so the wax is steamed out, and there's a cavity left, hopefully and usually exactly the cavity that I sculpted in wax, and a reservoir is built around the top. So this is what a piece looks like, a mold looks like when it's ready to go into the oven. And you can see that now we're back into the positive. Teresa's legs are now in the positive plaster form, and the dress is in the negative. The molds are then dried. That can take up to a week, so pretty massive, and then loaded into the oven. And the really sort of defining factor, or the unique factor of the Czech factories, is the scale on which they work. Most of you know from the collection here that the Czechs have developed monumental glass casting that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world. So these ovens are completely lined with electric elements, and that's what will melt the glass into the molds. So here's an oven ready to go. And then the glass is stacked into the top of the molds. And then the oven is brought up to the melting temperature of the glass, and the glass flows down and takes the shape of my wax. Then the annealing process happens, and the annealing is the slow cooling so the glass doesn't break into 1,000 pieces. And that can take anywhere from 6 weeks to 2 months. And you can imagine at this point I'm tearing my hair out, jumping up and down, learning how to be patient, because I have no idea if my project has worked or not. A small technical glitch. So this is the moment of truth. The molds come out of the oven, and you can see the plaster mold is completely exhausted, so it just sort of crumbles and falls away from the glass. Sometimes they have to use a chisel, which makes me very nervous. And then we take a look at the casting. We see there's something called touch, which is how the glass has melted into the mold, sort of the level of texture that it's taken on. Sometimes a mold will shift a little bit, and there'll be something called like a flange of glass sticking out. Those need to get ground off. And so at this point I work very closely with the cold workers, telling them what I want to have happen, and they do an incredible job of realizing it. So there's a lot of back and forth in the work in the factory. If things go the way according to plan, the only thing that really needs to happen is the reservoirs get cut off and then the pieces get matched together. So that's what's happening right now. And again, you know, that's enough to give me a heart attack, so I usually cover my eyes when that's happening. Okay. And just to refresh your memory, this is the glass, this is the mold for the bottom piece of Teresa in her dress, the piece here in the museum. And then this is the glass. Positive becomes negative. So these are her feet floating in space. This is the hand that was in contact with the drapery. And you can really see sort of the effect that I'm going for is this contact between flesh and fabric. And this is okay. One thing that I've felt very strongly about, one of the advantages of lost wax casting and why I sort of have pursued it, is that it offers an opportunity for detail that I think is not available in other forms of casting. And I think that this layer of detail creates a very intimate relationship between the viewer and the finished piece. So this is, as Tina mentioned, the first time the piece was exhibited was at the Czech Museum of Fine Arts. And, you know, with my good but really not sophisticated ability to speak Czech, I spoke with the curator, and another friend was there who actually spoke Czech. And in the end I said, well, how did it go? And he goes, you're having a show at the National Museum. And I was like, oh my God, that's great. And he was like, yes. So this is sort of how my life happens in the Czech Republic. It's kind of not so specific. But it was a huge honor to be able to exhibit at this museum, and they had an incredible space, which is a Romanesque cellar. So I feel like I've kind of been permanently spoiled by having my first exhibition in a solo exhibition in a Romanesque cellar. I combined the mirrors and a couple of the dresses, and my feeling was that they both dealt with this same sort of human phenomena, which is there's a sort of projected self, sort of the imagination of how you think you look, and then there's the exterior that the world sees. And those kind of critical, translucent barriers exist, and you become aware of them when you're confronted with your personal image, like looking into a mirror. So where do these ideas come from? This is sort of the more difficult aspect of art making to talk about. And I thought one way I could shed light on it is by sharing with you a range of historical references that I've collected over the past 10 years. Where do ideas come from? They come from the brain. And Arthur Danto asked me, he said, well, where did you get the idea to make a cast glass dress? And I said, I don't know, I just wanted to make a dress. And then I felt that that was a really pathetic answer and that I needed to learn. So I wrote to Oliver Sacks, who is a renowned brain doctor, neurosurgeon. And I said, where do my creative ideas come from? And the answer is it comes from the left front lobe of your brain. So here. But kind of, how does it happen? That's an even more kind of obscure mystery. So I think what happens is a lot of influences come into your mind, and then they sort themselves out into some kind of original interpretation. And my work clearly makes reference to the classical Greek and Roman sculpture. And when I came upon these pieces in a museum, what really interested me about them was both the author's use of drapery to articulate the human figure, and also exactly technically how they rendered the folds of fabric in marble. In addition, despite their completely classical origin, this installation looked absolutely contemporary to me. One of the most intriguing aspects for me was how these pieces are scarred and fragmented. As I sculpt with fabric over my absent figures, as I drape the fabric on the shells, I definitely feel a connection to both these ancient sculptures and to contemporary fashion designers, such as Madame Gris. Madame Gris worked in Paris in the 1920s, and she was known for her series of Grecian gowns. And she really pioneered the direct draping of fabric onto the body. And her contemporaries were Man Ray at the Art Academy, you know, so she was really in the milieu of artists, but she wrote that because of her gender, she was forced to go into fashion, and she felt if she had been born either a different gender in a different period of time, she would have been a sculptor. So in my studio, sort of without any awareness at all, I kind of made this female vocabulary of making. You know, I'm sewing and using hairspray to stiffen the fabric. I use irons to flatten sides of, you know, castings before I take them to the factory. I use sewing needles, hair dryers, and it just sort of intrigued me. At one point, somebody came to the studio and they said, "This is like all, you know, female vocabulary." So here I am, hard at work, preparing some drapes. This image I liked because it invites simultaneous ideas about presence and absence. And this contradiction is what intrigues me, and I think in my pieces I also work with this idea of presence and absence, and I think it's very attractive to people. This image is just a fountain I came upon, but what attracted me to it was how the drapery is concealing the face but simultaneously revealing it, articulating the features. Now we're moving into flat paintings. So here, sort of, it's the symbolic use of fabric, and the fabric is used both as a pictorial element, but as an indication of wealth. I always call this the age of static cling or irrational drapery, because it's just not possible, right? So I sort of worked with some pieces creating this kind of uplifting drapery. In this image, the fabric is used as an indication of spiritual wealth, not monetary wealth. Here, I was intrigued how the fabric became a code. It signified both a hierarchy and a hierarchy inside of a particular monastery, as well as an affiliation with a set of beliefs. Here, fabric is used to venerate these ancient sculptures, sort of reactivating them religiously, spiritually. And in my mind, fabric can be as provocative and sumptuous as human flesh. You know, here I love the direct correlation between these folds of the shirt and the folds of her human body. Again, this just contact between flesh and fabric, visual contact. As I mentioned a bit earlier, in the absence adorned pieces, I not only worked with the dresses, but adding pieces of drapery to explore the expressive potential. And here you have a great contrast of the exuberant Saint Teresa and the very melancholic Saint Agnes. In this piece, I worked with an older model, and I had her take a seated pose with her hands in her lap. And then when I was working in the studio, I filled the hands with fabric and then made it overflow and fall onto the ground. And the idea was to express the feeling of loss, that something was getting away from her. In making this work, I wanted to explore both the ecstatic use of drapery while raising questions of ephemerality and impermanence. Here, the implied human presence accentuates the absence of a human being. And this is a small piece I made called Discarded Dress, playing with the same idea. So not all of my inspirations come from textbooks. I was on a walk one weekend in the Czech Republic, and I came upon these scarecrows. And I thought this was a great example to show how something can be really directly inspirational. So now I'm going to move away from glass for a moment and talk about how I use print, and again on a monumental scale, to explore the same themes of presence and absence and transparency. I thought, here I am, I'm sort of addicted to transparency, and wouldn't it be interesting to give myself a challenge of using a completely different set of materials to achieve the same effect. And so you can see here in the pocket of the jacket, there's a small coin. Here, the structure of the dress, the gatherings in my mind became a spine, and these wrinkles around the edge became an abstracted rib cage. Again, here you can see the spine and the implied rib cage sort of disappearing into smoke. Again, dealing with that sort of ephemeral sensation. This is the monster press that I used to make these pieces, the prints, and it was during this residency that it became apparent to my husband that moderation is not my strength. So now I wanted to go to my most recent exhibition. This is Absence Adorned, and it was at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma. So this is the group of pieces where I was really working both with the clothed human form and these additional, flourishes of drapery. This was the first time this is the second time I showed the prints, the mirrors and the dresses together. But I also incorporated the prints, and you can see a set of drapes cast in glass. And I wanted to continue to work with drapery, but move away from the human form and kind of combine these, what I really identify as the translucent boundary, between public and private space, the imagined self and the perceived self. Okay, so that's sort of my glasswork to date, and now I wanted to talk about a year and a half ago, I went to Japan, and my point in going there was to study the kimono. And I wanted to challenge myself by looking at the same topic through a different cultural lens. So I lived in Kyoto, which is the center of kimono making, and learned as much as I could about kimono making, and it was not easy. I had to learn to speak a little Japanese, which was a disaster, and ingratiate myself with people, which actually managed to happen magically. This is a woman named Akiko Nakamura, and she is a fifth generation brocade weaver, so that's the type of weaving that they do to make the obi belt. And she basically said, you're an artist and you need to learn everything about kimono, so come with me. And she took me around to all the studios of her friends from school. So we went to dyeing studios, weaving studios, and then days that we weren't doing that, she and a friend of hers worked with me in her studio, teaching me how to put on kimono, tie obi, how to fold and properly care for the kimono. It was really like she kind of took me on as her surrogate daughter. And what's fascinating is how I found the kimono very beautiful, but incredibly rigid. She taught me about the appropriate motifs you wore at which season and what the fabric needed to be, and everything was specific. It was like the most highly codified clothing vocabulary I've ever seen. And the other thing that I found is that when you wear the kimono, it completely transforms how you move. So I tried to, as much as possible, wear the kimono and go through daily life to learn the body language, because I think that's very important. The second person that I met who was very key was Manami-san, and he is a Yuzen painter. So Yuzen is a style of painting with vegetable dye directly onto silk using rice paste as a resist. Manami-san was very enthusiastic about my work in glass, and he invited me to do a collaborative project with him. But so initially I didn't want to insult him, and I was trying to work with, you know, very Japanese themes, and he said, no, bring your own vocabulary to this. So this is the pattern I gave to him, and it's just sort of a wrinklage on the fabric of the kimono. So then we worked together in the studio, and he was very liberal. He would just sort of hand me the paintbrush and say, paint. And there's all of these different steps, and I thought we were painting with this ink that becomes invisible when you put it in water, but it turns out it was the real ink, and I was making a real mess of it. So Manami-san gracefully took over and pulled the project through. So my contribution was the wrinklage, and his contribution were these beautiful flower motifs. This is the sort of layout of the kimono before the ink, the colored ink is applied. We had a lot of discussion about color. Of course, I wanted the piece to be completely black and white, and Manami-san said, okay, and then it came back in sort of these more colorful than black and white colors, which was probably a good decision in the end, you know, he's the expert. So then once the kimono was completed, we needed to sign it, and that's done with a hanku. So this is Manami-san doing his, and then they actually made for me my own stamp so I could sign the kimono. And there's the finished piece. So, so now I'm sort of, I've come back to Prague with about 250 kimonos, much to the pleasure of Korean Air, who surcharged me for doing that. And now that's where I'm at in my studio, is working with this new topic and beginning to think about how I will transform and realize these pieces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen, for a wonderful talk and a really beautiful documentary on our piece. It's so valuable to have that information. Is there any questions that people have for Karen?
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question if people didn't hear it. The question was, the glass that I load into the top of the molds appears to be clear, but the piece upstairs does not appear to be perfectly translucent. And the answer is that that is correct, because the finished surface of the piece upstairs is sandblasted and then acid etched, so it gives it this sort of silky finish.
Is your next project going to be saris?
You're reading my mind. Well, I will proceed with the kimonos, and the dresses were actually a 10-year endeavor, so that'll bring me to 50 years old by the time I finish with the kimono, so I'll meet you in India when I'm 50.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you made the images on the mirrors that you showed us?
Yeah, absolutely. The question was about how the images are engraved on the back of the mirror. And it's basically technology that is used for making gravestones. It's a little morbid. but it is a gelatin resist that is photosensitive. So the image of the photograph is transferred onto that gelatin resist. That is applied to the back of the glass mirror, and then it's sandblasted. There is a prize for the best question, so you shouldn't be shy. Oh, yes. There's a microphone behind you. That's okay.
Have you worked with your own genealogy?
My own family?
Yeah.
I thought about it actually because my mother was coming to Prague and I really wanted to take a body mold off of her. But then she had a bit of an accident before she came and I thought maybe this isn't the year. But she's coming again in April, and so I thought I would definitely like to probably take a seated pose or a reclining pose of my mother's body.
Do you have the hand imprints on many of your sculptures? Because when we take school groups through, the kids think that's fascinating. It's just the coolest thing in the whole sculpture gallery.
I think there's hand imprints on 2 pieces.
Hi, I'd like to ask what it is, I guess, that you find so fascinating about the Japanese kimono, because it seems like that would have far fewer folds since they're so linear as opposed to, you know, the graceful draping of your other projects.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's exactly the same question Manami-san asked me in Kyoto. He said, well, what are you going to do? Because the ideal Japanese figure is actually a cylinder for both men and women. And in preparing your body to wear the kimono, you apply all of these pads and you basically erase the individual nature of your body, and you wrap the kimono around. And that's exactly what intrigued me, is the fact that it's almost the erasure of the self, and the kind of information comes from your knowledge and your ability to wear exactly the right fabric, to tie the obi in the proper way for the occasion, to have the correct motif for this. You know, there's not 4 seasons in Japan, there's like 24 micro seasons. You know, there's one kind of flower that's coming out during only this week, and you should be dressing appropriately for that, and it's this extremely particular vocabulary. And so instead of working with the drapery kind of, which is the Western vocabulary, I'm hoping to find a way to work with that different and very particular vocabulary.
When in your casting process, in your casting process, when you have the wax figure and then you have the clothes draped on it, and you're applying your hairspray and wax, what sort of armature do you have on the inside of the figure to hold it up while you're working on it?
Usually the wax is about 2.5 centimeters thick, so a little more than an inch thick. And usually what I do is after I take the 2-part mold, I hold it up with ropes under the arms and I build a base around the bottom. And then once that base is cooled, the figure can just stand on that base as I'm draping it.
When I look at your piece called Evening Dress with Shaw, I always think of Vera Wang wedding dresses. And I was wondering if she is aware of you as an artist, or has she ever contacted you to commission a sculpture?
Sadly, she hasn't.
Too bad for her.
But feel free to let her know.
I will.
To know, Karen, you said you have 400 dresses. Yeah. Well, where do you acquire those? I mean, is this a long-term thing, or do you go out shopping specifically for sculpture dresses, or how do you do that?
I actually go out shopping specifically for sculpture dresses, and sort of my main source is Domsies, which is a used clothing store in Brooklyn, and it's a giant warehouse. And I sort of go in and I clean them out. And I don't try to make any decisions when I'm in the store. I just go for everything. And then when I get home to the studio, and sometimes I'll take apart dresses or, just use one part or another and put things together. So it really becomes a palette.
Do you destroy the dresses?
Yes.
Are you going to destroy your kimonos?
The kimonos will be destroyed. I know. I feel guilty already.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Karen. That was really nice. Really good. This has been a video cast by the Corning Museum of Glass in Corning, New York, the world's largest museum devoted to the art, history, and science of glass. Upcoming Meet the Artist programs include lectures by Tom Petty in June 2008 and Therese LaHaye in November 2008. For information on these and other programs, please visit the museum's website at www.cmog.org.